All right, so today we're diving into some pretty dark stuff. The story of Albert Fish. We've got excerpts from this research article. It's called Psychology of Albert Fish. It's a tough read, not gonna lie, but I think it's important, to try and figure out what made this guy tick. Not just like the gory details of his crimes, but like the roots of his behavior. Was he born evil, or did something, make him a monster? It's that classic nature versus nurture thing. And to help us untangle all this, we've got our expert here. They are amazing at connecting those psychological dots. So,
It's rarely that simple, right? Like a choice between born or made, especially with someone as complex as Albert Fish. It's more like, think of it like a recipe, I guess. You've got all these ingredients and they can interact in ways you might not expect.
yeah, a recipe for a monster,
Yeah.
so to speak. And even just figuring out how many victims he actually had is it's a challenge. I mean, he was known by all these creepy names: Boogeyman, Gray Man, Moon Maniac, Vampire of Brooklyn. I mean, each one is like, hinting at a different kind of horror.
And the actual number could be even higher than what's officially recorded. The article points out that he often targeted kids who were less likely to be reported missing,
Mm-hmm.
especially African-American children. It's a chilling thought, right?
Mm-hmm.
How societal biases can actually, like, hide these horrific acts.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember, too, that his crimes went way beyond just murder, right? We're talking a molestation of potentially hundreds of children, torture, disfigurement, even cannibalism. I mean, we're not going to get into the really gruesome details here, but they are part of the story. And I think understanding them helps us understand, like, the depths of his depravity.
Exactly. It's not about sensationalizing anything. It's about context, right?
Yeah.
These details, they kind of paint a picture of this guy who was driven by these impulses that, most of us can't even begin to fathom. But to get to the why, we got to start at the beginning.
Okay, so let's rewind all the way back to Fish's early life. He wasn't exactly born into a picture-perfect family, right? I mean, we're talking 7 family members with severe mental illness, 2 deaths in asylums. His father was 75 when Fish was born. His mother suffered from hallucinations. It's like, from the get-go, he was dealt a really tough hand.
It's definitely significant. I mean, it suggests a possible genetic predisposition to mental illness. But, and this is important, it's not a guarantee. There are plenty of people with family histories like that who don't end up like Albert Fish. So there's got to be more to the story.
Right, and that's where the St. John's Orphanage comes in. Fish was sent there when he was just 5, and it wasn't exactly a nurturing environment, to say the least. It was more like a breeding ground for trauma. Public beatings were common, and kids were forced to watch others being punished.
The article calls that shame punishment. And it can be really damaging. It's not just about the physical pain, but the humiliation, right? And for a young kid, that can create some really distorted associations. Fish actually claimed that it was in the orphanage that he started linking pain with arousal,
Yeah.
which, you could see as a precursor to his sadomasochistic tendencies later on.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how anyone could come out of a place like that emotionally healthy. And Fish's troubles didn't end when he left the orphanage either. He was bedwetting until he was 11, constantly running away. I mean, clear signs of some ongoing instability.
Oh, absolutely. And then on top of all that, he suffered this serious head injury as a kid, which led to chronic headaches, dizziness, even a stutter. So that suggests possible neurological damage, right?
Mhm.
And then you add in the early exposure to some unusual sexual practices, the voyeurism in public bathrooms. I mean, these are signs of developing what we call paraphilias, basically sexual interests that deviate from what's considered typical. It all points to a mind that was moving further and further away from normal.
It's like each event just kind of built on the last one, pushing him further down this dark path.
Exactly, yeah.
So now let's move into Fish's adult life. See how these early experiences start to manifest, because this is where things get even more disturbing. He starts racking up a criminal record larceny, sending obscene letters. He's in and out of mental institutions.
Yeah.
Doctors labeled him as, abnormal and psychopathic. But back then, mental health was so poorly understood, right?
Oh, totally. That historical context is crucial. We can't judge the interventions of the past by today's standards, right? What they considered abnormal then might be understood very differently now.
Right. It's a good reminder that our understanding of mental health is always evolving. And then there's Fish's marriage, too. He had 6 children, but eventually his wife leaves him, and he later blames her abandonment for his actions, which,
That's classic blame displacement. Trying to avoid taking responsibility. It's something you see a lot with people who commit horrific acts. They deflect blame, minimize their own culpability.
right. like twisting the narrative. And speaking of disturbing behavior, this is where we have to talk about Fish's sadomasochism. The guy embedded needles into himself, used a nail-studded paddle, even set himself on fire. It's hard to even imagine the pain he was inflicting on himself.
But remember, it's not about the shock value, right? It's
Yeah.
about understanding the connections. Remember how he reportedly found pleasure in watching others suffer as a child? That
Yeah.
early association of pain and arousal. His self-harm could be what we call repetition compulsion, where people kind of unconsciously reenact traumatic experiences as a way to try and gain control. So having experienced so much pain and humiliation as a kid, Fish might have been unconsciously replicating those feelings through self-harm.
So, like, he was trying to master his own trauma by inflicting it on himself.
Yeah.
And then there's picarism.
Right, so picarism is a paraphilia that involves, well, deriving pleasure from piercing the skin with sharp objects. And in Fish's case, it seems intertwined with his broader sadism. It wasn't just about the pain he inflicted on himself, but the pain he inflicted on others, and his reported enjoyment of his victim's suffering. That's really what sets him apart from somebody who just engages in self-harm. It's that desire to cause pain to others.
Okay, so given everything we've learned about Fish's life, the family history, the horrific abuse, the disturbing behaviors, how do you reconcile the influences of biology and environment in shaping his personality? I mean, was he born evil, or did his experiences make him that way?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, there's rarely a simple answer, especially with a case as extreme as this.
So you're saying it's likely a mix of both nature and nurture.
Exactly. You've got the family history of mental illness, suggesting a potential genetic vulnerability. And then on top of that, you layer the unimaginable abuse he suffered as a child. It's like a perfect storm of contributing factors, each one amplifying the others.
But could we ever really pinpoint which factor had a greater influence? Like, is it even possible to separate the two?
Even with all the advances in research, it's incredibly difficult to completely disentangle nature and nurture. It's like trying to separate two colors of paint that have been thoroughly mixed. It's almost impossible.
So we've learned so much about psychology since Fish's time, but we still might not have a definitive answer.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes this case and this whole discussion so compelling, right? It forces us to confront the limits of our understanding. We can analyze the pieces, but the complete picture of what created Albert Fish, well, that might always remain elusive.
It's like the more we learn, the more we realize how much we still don't know.
Yeah, it's the beauty of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
It keeps us asking questions, searching for deeper understanding.
You've definitely given us a lot to think about. Thanks for walking us through this difficult but important deep dive. We've gone from Fish's creepy nicknames and the horrible scope of his crimes to the potential roots of his behavior, that complex web of nature and nurture.
And don't forget the societal context, too. The limited understanding of mental health back then, the way his crimes were perceived, it all adds another layer to this already complex story.
It really does make you think about how far we've come in understanding these issues, but also how much further we still have to go.
Exactly.
It's true, it really does.
It really does.
So that kind of brings us to like a really thought-provoking question. Like, what if we could pinpoint the exact cause of Fish's behavior? Like if we could say, with certainty, this is what made him a monster, would that change anything?
Yeah, it's a great question, yeah.
Would it make his actions any less horrific, knowing he might not have had like full control over his impulses? Or would it be even more disturbing, like realizing that this capacity for evil, is it just lurking within us, waiting for the right, or I guess the wrong circumstance to come out?
Exactly right. Like, would understanding him somehow absolve him? Or would it make the whole story even more unsettling?
Yeah.
It's a question with no easy answers, but it's definitely one worth thinking about.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, we're going to wrap up our exploration of Albert Fish for today. This deep dive into the life and mind of this notorious figure. It's been a journey into darkness for sure, but hopefully it's also been insightful. And, we encourage you to keep exploring this topic on your own, read more, ask questions, and always keep learning. Sometimes those darkest corners of human history, they can teach us the most valuable lessons about ourselves. Yeah, it's true. Sometimes those dark corners, they can really shine a light on something unexpected about ourselves, We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from those chilling nicknames Fish used, like the Boogeyman and the Gray Man, to the sheer scope of his crimes. And then we kind of dug deeper, right? Examined his childhood, his family history, the potential role of mental illness, all trying to get a handle on that nature versus nurture debate.
And it's important to remember this isn't just some, theoretical exercise.
Yeah.
Fish's story, It highlights these real-world issues that are still with us today,
Hmm.
like how we deal with mental illness as a society, how we understand all the factors that can lead someone to commit these acts of extreme violence.
Absolutely. It raises a lot of questions that we're still grappling with, Like, even if we could say for sure that Fish's horrific abuse led him to become a monster, would that change how we view his responsibility? Or does understanding the roots of his behavior somehow make him less accountable?
That's a tough one. It's a question philosophers and legal scholars have been wrestling with for centuries. Does understanding someone's motives, even those twisted ones, does that diminish the impact of their actions?
Yeah. It's a tough thing to wrap your head around. On the one hand, you can empathize with the pain and trauma that shaped his life, right? But then on the other hand, there's the horrific consequences of his actions, the innocent lives he took, the families he destroyed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a constant balancing act, right,
Yeah.
between recognizing the potential influence of factors beyond someone's control and still holding them accountable for the choices they ultimately make.
This deep dive has definitely been a challenging one. It's forced us to confront some of the darkest parts of human nature, to grapple with questions that, well, that might not have any easy answers.
But I think that's the value of these explorations. They make us think critically, to challenge our assumptions,
Yeah.
to really acknowledge the complexity of what it means to be human. There might not be any simple solutions, no easy answers, but that shouldn't stop us from trying to understand.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to continue pondering these questions. This deep dive into the life and mind of Albert Fish, it's been dark, for sure, but hopefully it's been enlightening too. If you're interested in learning more, we encourage you to do your own research. Read more about this case, explore the complex issues it raises. After all, understanding the darkness, even if it's unsettling, it can help us appreciate the light even more. Thanks for joining us.